All right, good afternoon again, everybody. My name is Sasha Chilkova. I'm a marketing manager here at Witham Digital. Welcome to our webinar, Office 365 Turns 5, Does Modern Equal Mature? As you all know, Office 365 did turn 5 this year. So I have Adam Levithan here with me today from Witham Digital as well. He's a principal and also Microsoft MVP. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. He will talk to us about some major differences between classic and modern experiences in Office 365, what modern means to an everyday employee like yourselves, and then we'll also touch on the future roadmap of Office 365 features. Just a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to run through. The webinar is being recorded. We'll stick to about a 45-minute session, leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end. Please send in your questions throughout the webinar. Don't hold back. We'll try to address all of them at the very end. If we don't get to them, we'll reply to them by email, or maybe we'll even get a blog out of it. But send the questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar panel. And as I mentioned, the slide deck and the recording, we'll send out links to that later this afternoon. And with that, Adam, you can kick it off.
Great. Thank you so much, Sasha. Thank you all for attending. And after I introduce myself, we'll have a few polls that go one at a time, so bear with me, but that means that we can, whoop, not yet, we can get some information from you and dedicate this to your time that you spent with us. So thanks again for joining us. So my name is Adam Levithan, recently joined Witham Digital, actually back from the formal iteration of Portal Solutions. So really excited to be with such a great group of people. But now I'm focusing as a product manager on our one window workplace. So that's why classic and modern is so close to my heart, because we have had a internet as a service for the last 4 years. And now we are going to SharePoint framework and modern, because that's the future. But that's a whole different discussion. And one of the polls questions is if you want to talk to me about that. Just a little background about me. I have started in SharePoint from doing InfoPath forms, hands-on, to leading a network operations team. I really focus on user adoption, information architecture. I've dabbled in security and spent a few years at a migration ISV. So I have experience that none of you want, which is hundreds and hundreds of migrations, but that's one of the things we do here. I'm proud to say I'm an MVP for the 3rd year, so working in the local area and speaking all across the country, and been lucky enough in the world. And fun fact about me, I am currently working to build up my stamina for a 150-mile bike ride from the middle of Delaware to the beach of Delaware, and that is coming up with a few of my friends. So I love cycling, but I kept that spandex picture out so you all would stay online. Okay, enough about me. Let's do a little bit of the polling. So first, I want to know, are you currently on premises? On-prem, on premises, not on premise. So this will help me understand who's here. We're going to be talking about a little bit about on-prem right now. I will give you about 10 more seconds to answer this. Thank you all who have already joined. One of the reasons, certainly is a big difference between on-prem and Office 365 experiences. All right, so then if you're on-premise, when do you plan to move? So just getting your time frame for how important this information is to you. So we'll wait another 15 seconds for this. Maybe this is a habit out of migrating people, but I also talks about urgency. Great, okay, we'll move on to the next one. because people did say that they were in Office 365 in that first question. Curious about how many percent of your sites are in, already moved. Or sorry, opposite, are in Classic. And yes, I know it's not rocket science, and one of the things with Microsoft is it's not easy to exactly tell the percentage, but you have to make an effort for that. All right, great. I think we have one more.
Two more, I think.
Two more, okay. Oh yeah, this is a fun one. So, part of this session, I used to give my OneDrive session at SP TechCon and SharePoint Fest, and it started with "Is it ready?" So I guess I could have titled this as "Is it ready?" also, because, well, let's see your confidence in moving and using these modern solutions for intranets. Fantastic, thank you so much. And then finally, as a product manager, just seeing if you're available for me to give you a ring and just talk about, well, that confidence is a tie-in, and just, how you're looking at modern and what's most important to you. So perfectly understand if you don't want me calling you, and much appreciated for those who volunteer to have a conversation. All right, well, thank you all so much. And now let's get on to the answers. And let me just look again. So about 60% are still on premises, actually a little bit more. And for when they're going to move, 6 months to a year is the vast majority of people. And then for classic sites, vast majority have 50% and more, like 80%, almost 90%, 50% or more sites in classic, with 35% actually all in. And then 50% of you are medium, and some of you, I'm pretty impressed, 30% are very high confidence that they can use Office 365 as an intranet. I will pass that information on to the product team. They're going to be very excited about it. Okay, so just that was the quick overview to share with you what you spend time on. And so now what we're going to talk about is what's classic, the impact on your employees, a little bit of roadmap, and then those questions and answers. So as questions come up, type away so you don't forget them into the question box, and we will be reviewing them at the end. And part of that is so the audience that is listening on tape can have all of the information, and then they can listen into the questions if they want or not, which I love the questions, but want to make sure we get everything clearly shared. Okay, so I'm not the biggest car guy in the whole world. You can raise your hand, in the chat if you are, but to me, that's classic. That's a 1950s, I don't know the exact year, Corvette. Major impact on certainly American sports cars, but from what little I know, you could argue impact on global design, aesthetics, power for sports cars everywhere. So to me, that's classic. Probably would be expensive to maintain. I certainly don't have a garage spot for it, but if I was given a chance, yeah, that car would be mine. Then let's go to Corvette ZR1, 1990s. That's nice. I don't immediately have the same reaction. I'm going to date myself, but this is a car that was introduced during my early driving days. Of course, back then I wanted it. The engine's much bigger. I'm sure it's quadruple as fast as the 1950s one. But if we go back to that engine, it's quite possible that a mid-sized sedan could be as fast as that 1990s Corvette was. Also, another thing that I remember was when I sat in it, I used to have a Chevy Blazer, and they have the same exact stereo, and I really felt gypped. So very not practical, very nice car, cutting edge for the day, but to me, not necessarily classic. And why I bring this up is I don't necessarily think that Microsoft, when we're talking about classic versus modern, is using classic in the sense of that it is something that should be maintained. It's something that should be looked after. They're using it in the terms of, well, we have to politely say this is older technology. It's more the 1990s Corvette than it is the 1950s Corvette. It was good at the time. The technology was what it was. But now we have a new ZR1. I guess I can next time show the picture of that. So that's where I'm coming from with this conversation. So let's talk about the technology. So tongue-in-cheek, but truthfully, I'm going to say classic 2003. In the chat, type away if you had the wonderful luxury of using 2003. I did, and one of the pieces that I want to talk about is site structure. And I love this example, and I think I'm also being polite, but the first organization that I migrated from 2003 to 2007, they literally had a site that was called Network Operations. Then they had a sub-site that was called Network Operations. Then they had a library that was called Network Operations. And then, yes, there was a folder called Network Operations. So you can imagine the length of that URL. And then also people, complained that they couldn't find information. Oh, gee, that's really a huge surprise as to why it's not clear where information is stored. But one of the reasons was in 2003, this was cutting edge technology, and it wasn't as clear as to how to organize information. So you'll see familiarity here. We have the left-hand quick launch, we have the header, we have navigation in the global, we have our web parts. Wow, this stuff's really cool for the time. It was an amazing step forward for organizations and corporations. Now I should do a drum roll and say, now we get classic 2007. This is the big change. This is when everyone went, holy cow, what can SharePoint do? People will also notice I am avoiding the intranet design capabilities in this discussion because, well, I'll probably save that for another webinar, and also because we just want to talk about high-level overview. So again, what we can see is similar structure, but for those of us who used 2007, we knew that there was a lot more technology underneath it. And just to remind those who weren't using 2003 or 2007 in the beginning, one of the major differences was the integration between SharePoint as it was and something called the collaboration content management server, content management server 2003. That was all rolled into Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007. And so what that gave you the capability to do was to create publishing pages and was to use SharePoint not only as an intranet, but also an internet. And yes, we've all seen probably the Ferrari website, and my favorite always was the Hawaii Air website. And there was a lot of great capabilities of being able to house data and deploy SharePoint sites, both intranet and and internet. Now, also here we have a little more technical pieces. So we had web applications, and so the web applications had some of the technology and security, and as I usually sort of think of it as a boundary. And we would have intranet collaboration projects, Teams, extranet, different types of web applications to have different authentication, different users in it. Here, obviously, you can see just a quick nondescript example that you would have a site collection that I'll call it our intranet. I've worked with a lot of groups that call it Connect, which is really cool. And then you would have subsites, usually, because that's how you handled the channels or the web navigation. And purposely on the bottom level here, you would have two sites in your SharePoint environment that were for departments. One would be intranet content and one would be collaboration content. So that was very typical for your information architecture and your technical structure. So 2007, lots of new features. Then we get to 2010. And 2010 introduced a lot of new back-end features and the ribbon, because it was following in its Office brethren's step to have the ribbon instead of a lot of, well, let's be honest, hidden capabilities within a menu structure. So that was cool. I thought actually at this point we would start turning into less design-centric because it could be used more like an Office product, even though it was taken out of the Office family. That's a whole different discussion. But then at least I had learned from the experience of the site collections, the boundaries of the database. I worked in Washington, D.C. at the National Institutes of Health, and the organizations we worked with had a tendency to use acronyms for their departments. And then if the leader of that department left, they would change the acronym. Oh my God, if it's a subsite, it becomes really hard to move that content, to merge it, to rename it. So in 2010, we started to build out each individual department as a site collection of its own for flexibility, for security, for content holding and the limits that were on the databases. And so here we still have repetition of different sites for different purposes, intranet versus collaboration. Now we have more subsites underneath a department. So just how it evolved over time. Then we got into 2013, and really nothing super changed. If you'll notice, I cheated and I used the upgraded 2010 version here on purpose. That there wasn't that much major change. You can go ahead and argue with me in the chat, but for all intents and purposes, there was a technology upgrade. It was modernized. There was much better HTML. There was much better scripting that could be done on pages. There are some niceties of 2013 compared to 2010, definitely some behind the scenes additives. The structure didn't change unless you were using Office 365. And so in Office 365, we stopped having the ability to have multiple web applications. So you got to have one web application. And so that meant that the subsites were now site collections underneath it. And so the intranet is now a peer to what was in 2010, a separate, completely separate URL for collaboration. So that was a major change when people were moving into Office 365. Just to not cheat too much, here is the amazing different team site. Yes, the social features were added in SharePoint 2013. I didn't fill out the news feed here, but really it wasn't that great of a capability that could match, if we remember Yammer being really huge for conversations. And the SharePoint newsfeed just didn't match other capabilities that were coming out at the time. This was the quick launch, which was a nice area, document libraries, no big problem. So then let's go to switch it around. Now Office 365 comes first, and then SharePoint on premises, SharePoint 2016. So I matched the team site from SharePoint 2013 to 2016. And you can see there's just a gigantic change. We have an amazing wider bar up here. And then we also have a new menu structure over the document libraries, which is really nice and was really nice. But that was added into Office 365. And as you guys know, SharePoint 2016 was a snapshot of Office 365 at a specific time. So it was brought down, born from the cloud. And so here we continue in Office 365 to have the single URL for the web app. And then I want to highlight that in hybrid scenarios or pure Office 365 scenarios, what Microsoft started to do was add, I don't know if we want to call them apps or features or solutions, but a site collection, which had always been a unit of measure for the database, as I discussed, now is quite literally in this image, hanging off other features like an Outlook group, like Planner, like Teams, and on. We can name all the new features here. So SharePoint 2016 was a true inflection point where now the Office 365 team was building cloud first and was focused on cloud technologies that really would work more seamlessly that they had in all of those previous versions of SharePoint. And so I do kind of want to bring up internet, really quickly. So of course, the Nielsen-Norman group shows all of the great internets every year, and still SharePoint is leading. In 2010, these are what some intranets looked like. They're very web party, very square, but flexibility to show content. And then we go to 2016, people were able to use different technologies, much prettier, much graphically intense, that matched the consumer website experiences that people were having. And that flowed through the different generations, but built on SharePoint. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because modern kind of takes that capability away. So I don't want to just talk technical. So that's what I had to talk about, what's really going to have impact on the employees. And so I guess that was one poll we probably should have asked, which is, who are you? Are you a content owner? Are you an administrator? Are you a decision maker, director of IT? Feel free to, again, put in the chat. And I see Joseph answered that he had 2003 experience. So thanks so much for putting that in. And this, again, is trying to, whether you're an end user or not, talk about things that, well, your employees will care about, will help you adopt modern compared to keeping classic. And so this is a great time for those who are on premises. And in truth, the next slide, this is a SharePoint 2019 image. What? Yes. If you haven't heard already, SharePoint 2019 will have modern sites, modern pages. And so that is a great capability. And it looks exactly the same as Office 365 as of, I think the snapshot moved a little bit because they are including communication sites and hub sites, which we'll talk about in a second. So really great capability. If you in the Washington, D.C. area, there are a lot of people who will still have a footprint, quite literally, on the ground. So this makes hybrid even easier because the look and feel will be exactly the same, but also, well, for the reasons we want to talk about it. I always like including just, Microsoft context in these conversations. Here again, we're showing that Microsoft is proposing, they don't ever, I looked really hard for an official statement not to use subsites, and that doesn't exist. However, they do say that the site collection is how Office 365 sites are meant to be used. So every single site you create is creating a site collection. One difference is a communication site does not create these other pieces, while a collaboration site does create all of the different features within Office 365. I highly recommend, I don't know if you just caught what I said, do not call it a team site anymore. Why is that? Well, because we have this wonderful peer called Teams, and it gets really confusing when you're talking about all of these different things. But more context is within Microsoft 365. And so this is from your desktop all the way up to the cloud in Office 365. And you know, there was fear for a while that SharePoint would go away. While the interface that we're going to discuss has changed, SharePoint is quite literally, again, in this picture, the center of the capabilities of Office 365 moving forward. Our end users might just not realize it, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. Also, you know, highlight that we were talking about the Office groups, and especially for the people who are on premises moving to a cloud, highly recommend looking at how you can change distribution groups in Exchange to Office 365 groups and making those transitions. So it makes your permissions even easier and clearer to understand when you're in Office 365. I apologize to those who are already there because it's hard to change it backwards. But here you can see all the different features and then everything supported by security compliance, the graph, and groups. So let's get into a little bit of modern. And I have to admit, probably your employees don't quite jump out of their seats and say, oh, I really want to know the difference between team sites, collaboration sites, and communication sites. But it's important, again, for me to give context. So they are different. You know, collaboration sites are traditional sites, while the communication ones are the traditional for intranets. So they've taken feedback from us and how we use SharePoint and given us the capabilities. So this is a really great way to look at the sites. And really the modern is almost this top shared part. So everything that is shared, that is really beneficial, is shared across team sites and communication sites. They're just different templates and they look different. And we'll talk about what is the same in a second and 3 things that your employees will really care about. Some other items, you know, because in modern, I skipped the intranet discussion. You can see here that this is where there's a big difference. That site design, you just don't have that much choice anymore. In the communication site, you have a few. They're not really huge, different area. And I mentioned this, we get the Office 365 groups. In truth, I think that the communication sites are more an administrative and intranet site than they are the traditional collaboration ones, but I could be wrong in a large size organization. So this is a really great slide that shows the 2 types of sites that are now available. And then there's also this piece called a hub site. So some of the major differences when you have all the site collections is that, well, there's not navigation that is unifying the different site collections. So finally, and I'll say it that way, the hub sites will provide navigation. Now, you know, we also struggle with this as our one window workplace solution, that we have a different navigation structure because there's still some limitations of these hub sites. So you have to know them, you have to be able to work with it. to be able to structure and restructure your site collections and how they show up. But really cool automatic navigation. The themes get applied to all the sites that are within the hub. The roll-up of news and activity. The search scope defaults to the hub. So a lot of really hard-to-code pieces that Microsoft has taken into account based on all of our different feedback, and they can watch how people are using Office 365. So if you guys have any questions about that in general, please keep them coming. All right, actually one question here is SharePoint 2019 only modern? You can do classic just like you can in Office 365, but it is designed to be modern. And the follow-up question, so communication sites are not in par with publishing as of right now. And I'll hold off on the rest of that chain until the end. But keep those questions coming, because those are lots of concerns. And we'll talk about it a little bit in the roadmap of stuff. So let's talk about what your employees will really care about. And so what your employees will really care about, in my mind, and again, you all can disagree. I'm happy to have that discussion. I believe is sharing versus permissions. What do I mean by that? So I grabbed some screenshots here, but let's go to an actual live site. Okay, so I'll jump. I opened a page to permissions. So when I talk about permissions, I talk about this lovely thing. So maybe your end users are not actually changing permissions themselves, but it's just the concept of, oh, who's an owner? Oh, who's a member? Oh, who's a visitor? What's going on here? What do we have custom permissions? Which I have to admit is an awesome benefit of SharePoint, but do employees really care about that? Probably argue that they don't really on an everyday on an everyday case. So yeah, we'll just keep it that way, and I mean it politely. So let's go back to a modern site, and so here, one of the big things is you can see, oh cool, I see who the members of this site are. I can create a manual web part that shows meet the team. But it's easy. Oh, there comes a card. That's pretty cool too. But now let's talk about members. Oh, I can click here and I can clearly see the members and the role. Pretty cool. So I obviously have permission to change their roles. That's pretty cool. And then I can directly add members, and I can pick Ashley. Really easy. See it there. I'm not going to add her, because then how would I demo this? But I really think that this simple piece is, it is so simple that people will say, okay, if you don't use the word SharePoint, they won't recognize that this is SharePoint, and this is what we've been working on. Then it's simple, it's quick. I admit, let's spend a little more time on documents. And so lists and libraries, and I just drag and drop some files in here. I think it looks really clean. There were some issues 2 years ago that the modern library was dropped on us without us knowing, and left-hand navigation didn't work, and global navigation didn't work. So that was problematic. But now we have a new user interface. We have the capability to add, to use Flow, to use Power Apps straight from an easier, you could call it a ribbon if we dare. We have information, we have filters, we have information about an item. I probably should select an item. One of my favorite things, let's talk about lots of folders, which I don't recommend, but we'll go lots of folders, 1 folder, 2 folder. Oh wait, I made a mistake there, or did I? But let me select this folder. This is really cool. So let's move, because I made the mistake. Current library, lots of folders, 1 folder, 2 folder, 3 folder. Yep, that's where I want it. Move here. Now let's open 3 folders. Ah, 4 folders. Amazing. How cool is that? So we have a move and a copy. If you also noticed, either way I can do this, but this allows you to have a publishing process. So to the person's question about publishing features, this is one way you can do it. You could actually do it with pages too, but the intention is with documents. So if you had a drafts document library and then a final document library, remember one of the things that was introduced in Office 365 and then brought down to SharePoint 2016 was that within a site collection, the link will never break. So if I move this, if you had passed a link, that copy link up here, to an item, as long as it stays within that section, that link is still going to work if you sent it to someone. And I hope that you sent it to someone. I truly do. Let's go back up all the way to documents. Another piece that I would talk about when we talk about permissions is the sharing. And so I hope you've all seen this. And why I think it's so amazing is because it's everywhere. So it's not only, it started in OneDrive, it moved to SharePoint, and it is also, if you're using Office 2016, it is the same exact sharing settings that are in all of the Office products. So you can't beat this. Great for us if you're in IT organization, that you don't have to train anyone on how to use things. And then great for us as IT. You can see that in this environment, we do not let people share with anyone. So really great. Also, there are going to be additions. I don't have it in this tenant, that you can create a password for the link, and you can also set a date that the link expires. So really cool stuff for both my first item, which was sharing versus permissions, and the second item, which is lists and libraries. Other things that you can do in a modern site that you were never able to do is, let's go, I have to admit, I love the no folders view. And so what does that mean? It means you show everything without folders. And so I created a really awesome column that says yes, no. And look at this, at a click, I can group a very nice group. Notice that it doesn't double say what this is. And I could save that view if I want to, save view as the grouped view. But also I realized, oh, unassigned. So what I can do here, which I think an employee would like, is I go here, I go, and look at that, bulk edit properties. Don't all celebrate at once. For here, I'll just say yes. And in a second, we will see that all of those were applied. Similar experience adding a column. 2013 added this, but really what we're showing is that in a specific item, in a specific document library, or truthfully a list, you can edit everything. You don't need the, as someone called it, the destroyer mode to be able to multiple edit, quick edit. That's very dangerous for users. So quick, high level, I think lists and libraries. Coming are some capabilities to be able to do column formatting, to really finally replace Excel within Office 365 list. So just go back to the presentation, sites for permissions, lists and libraries. And I don't know if there are any Doctor Who fans out there, but you know, pages like bow ties are cool again. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that out of the box, you get a responsive view. So you can see that it's the same, and I can show it live. It's the same exact page that we've been looking at for the IT department. Because the web parts have been built in the SharePoint framework, you don't have to do anything extra. That SharePoint framework is responsive. And so if you do it right, it's responsive. Also, you can see here what I've highlighted. Let's see if I can both zoom in and use the pen. I don't know. Let's see. Nope. But what this is here is this is a document library web part on a page. Remember my lots of folders? The breadcrumb shows on the page. Oh my Lord. That is fantastic. How long have we waited for that? So what I'm trying to say here is that pages are easy to use and there are reasons to use them. So if we go back to the home page here, always have to wait a second for everything to build. That's maybe, you know, one of the things difference between on-premises and the cloud is you're always looking at what the cloud speed is compared to the network speed of your on-premises environment. But here we can see lots of web parts. Oh, I did take that document library web part off. But also, this is probably for, you know, content owners or editors who really have a user experience. Okay, maybe WordPress has had it for a while, but we can edit the sections here, and we can choose the different layouts. Really easy, quick. You see how fast it is. Then we can add web parts. And so here, you have a list of web parts. If anyone can tell me why they would actually use a Kindle Instant Preview in their page, I would love to hear that. Twitter, I understand. Yammer, I certainly understand. Sites, everything else, that document library. Actually, we can even add that document library real quick. So here we select it, and there it shows up again. Lots of folders. Obviously, this is a narrow. So what I can do, oh look, that actually works compared to what used to happen when we tried to do that in old versions of SharePoint. You can see too that I can actually edit this. I can use it while in editing mode, which I really think is really cool too. So I love that feature. And so I'm truly messing up this page. So we can insert a different sections. Again, long list of web parts. For us, our web parts show down here in the other right now, and we'll put them up. But there you go. That's beyond what a normal employee would do, but I think it's important. Another one, we've had a metadata web part for quite a while, but now they've made page properties available right here. And why that's valuable is you can start using targeting and search and to find different pages. So that's really cool. You can see I don't have a nice image on the header, but that's okay. I will discard changes. Oh, so I'm going to show this in a second, but what will happen is you can turn on page approval, and that's going to use a flow, and it would say approve page, I believe. We'll look at that in a second. There. All right, I'll discard changes and we'll go back to the presentation. Keep the questions coming. I can't see if they're there, but we're getting close to the end, and I'll answer questions. So just some small reminders. I love this from Mark Rackley, so I attributed it to him. Modern is the future. Just like we were talking about, classic is remembering the old, modern is the future. And what do I mean by that? It actually isn't really a choice. It really is classic mode versus modern mode. That the back end has already been changed. This is just a graphical representation that you're choosing. And if you choose the classic mode, and I'm not making a value statement here, but really trying more for a statement of fact, if you choose the classic mode, it is going to be supported, but they're going to make little or no investments on it ever changing. So in the question, someone referenced page layouts, master pages. Those items are gone. They're supported, but there will never be any upgrades to it. You'll never get any more capabilities to it. So what I just showed in the layouts that Modern provides you of the different sections and the web parts that automatically size themselves to those sections, that is the new page layout. And the master page is really just an Office 365 theme that it's improving, but it isn't fully there, quite there yet. Also, I mentioned it before, and I joke here, it's mostly future-proof because we've seen across 2007 to today, 2003 till today, a lot of different development methodologies. But what Modern is using is the SharePoint framework. And the SharePoint framework is Microsoft drinking their own champagne. I joked in a session that they used to give us Prosecco, which is sparkling wine, right? And they would drink their own champagne, very close, but not exactly the same. Now we're all drinking champagne. And that's great because if something doesn't work well, they're changing it in the framework as they build web parts. Also with that, I guess I should add to this page, is that there are things that are missing in Modern. That's the #1 reason people do not move from Classic to Modern. I don't have a list of all of those things. I believe Mark Anderson does, but I'll work on one or a reference to him. And then also secure page coding. And why this is important, it's good and bad. It's bad because that means you can't use JavaScript like we used to, or only in a limited amount. But it's good because then you cannot have just sitting on your page bad code that can attack you and do malicious things. So just some small reminders. All right, quickly go through the roadmap and then we'll answer some questions. So actually, really quickly, we already saw the metadata that is rolling out, but it's so important that I wanted to highlight it again. Really good feature. One of the things though is this has been on there for about 5 months and now it's just getting rolled out. We did talk about page approval, so you can create a new or customize a flow for approval. You name the flow, you add the person who will approve it, save it as a draft, and submit for approval. So once it's approved, the page status will change to published, just like you want, and it'll be visible. So it's basically they created a flow for us, and you can change it if you like. So that's back to one of the publishing features that I know that I used all the time, to be able to edit something and not publish it until it's been reviewed. Some like minutia pieces, the hub site, are evolving, and they're now going to have rich site colors, which sounds again like something we should have had from the beginning, but it takes a lot for Microsoft to move. Approvals for being able to associate sites with a hub. So that's a big deal, right? So not just anyone can choose a site collection and put it into a hub and gain all of the permissions and navigation and all the other features. And then being able to actually script some different features, so like enforce permissions, share metadata, content management preferences, apply brand elements and different policies if you have them in security. That is all available when creating sites that are associated with a hub. So with that, it's 5. Yay! Fantastic. Is it mature? It's pretty close. I have to admit, I envy the people who are moving in 3 to 6 months, because after Ignite, and we'll have a webinar after that to talk about specifically intranet features. Some I know of, some I can't talk about right now. There are going to be changes and advancements. So September is going to be a really good time. But just because they announce it doesn't mean that it's actually going to be available in September. Although there's some things that will be available in September. So it's in the middle. All right. Besides those who volunteered to talk to me, I now want to get to some questions. So keep them coming. I just want to also say that if you want to see a little bit more about our one window solution, which is a intranet as a service, I say tongue-in-cheek, and why that is for us, one of our expertises is providing quite literally services. And so our solution combines technology, those web parts I just quickly showed you, with a long-term support directly, from us, answering Office 365 questions, getting you a customer success manager who's one of our Office 365 subject matter experts. So, please let us know if you'd like to see some more about that. Sorry, that's what pays the bills. Okay, so let's go through these questions again. Make sure, it rotated, sorry. Give me a second. So, all right, so if I didn't answer it, and I think I did, but the question for communication sites, will they allow for custom master pages, templates, CSS, branding of the intranet is important, of course. So no and yes. So there are not anymore the concept of master pages. And the reason for that is because Microsoft is building that SharePoint framework, that site and page structure, so that it works all the time, so that it delivers quickly. There is some branding that can be put on entire sites, but also remember that part of the goal of Office 365 is to have one context when you move from one feature to the next. So if you go from Office 365 to Outlook, or SharePoint to Outlook, that it's still pieces are in the same place and you understand what you're doing. However, I hope you saw that a communications page layout is pretty cool. And there's a lot you can do in web parts, either with a partner, yourself. You can build SharePoint framework web parts and put them into sites for your branding. So there is some flexibility of what you can do, but it is not the old SharePoint that we know. So I will just leave it there, and certainly add another question if you have a follow-up one, or send me an email. And actually, let me post that again. This lovely site to stare at. Someone was asking if I'm going to discuss some of the permissions and security issues. I did not. Let me go through these, and we could go back to that question. But there is a drawback of the simplicity. So you don't. These modern sites, if you use a modern collaboration site, are tied to the group, and then you either are in the group or you're out of the group. or you can be invited individually like I showed you in that sharing. So in some ways, it creates more complexity than the SharePoint permissions. That's a high overview. I'm sure the person who answered this would agree that I didn't cover the bases. Yep, someone else commenting on the security. Someone commenting that the move and copy is like the old managed content. Certainly is. The difference is that it's directly at any end user's fingers, certainly with the right permissions. Also, I know if you're familiar with migrations, that when you're using the migration API, there is actually an Azure storage, and it's leveraging that Azure storage to rapidly move content. But you're right, that's a great observation. It is similar, but it's different that it's on every document library and everyone has access to it. So yes, someone asking, doesn't share create broken permissions? Well, that's the difference. Is it certainly does, but you're not having permissions exactly the same way. Remember too that these are now site collections, so the permissions are much more locked down in that single site than it used to be when you had subsites under subsites under subsites. So I'm truly agreeing with you, and I believe that I've seen this person running around town. But it's easier to follow now than it ever was. And actually, there is a report in Excel that lets you know, what has been shared with whom. So when is 2019 being rolled out? That is any moment. Should be September. The beta is out. So you could download it and use it right now, but it should go into release the last quarter. I'm guessing at Ignite or very close to it. Ooh, great question. Actually, yep, 2 questions on that, so we'll end on that. So, actually, middle question, is InfoPath gone? And someone else asked about forms. So all of the capabilities, InfoPath, it still exists in Modern, but what you get is embedded Power Apps, or you sort of saw the out-of-the-box information panel is much nicer than it ever used to be. So those might work for you. Certainly there are third-party vendors too that make some really good forms, but your InfoPath forms will continue to work, believe it or not, but they will push you towards the successor, because there is no migration path, the successor, which is Power Apps. And so I'm interested in this, that someone's saying build internal intranets in MS Teams. Yeah, it depends on your definition. And so what we've done is you can make team templates. So in our governance module, we have team templates, and you can put a tab in every team that still brings you to that communication home that you want people to see. So it could be in every team, or it can be in a few teams. It depends on what you want. So this is really interesting. So this is where, so teams and Outlook groups. So teams are great, but really what I would think about is the exchange part of it also, because every time you create a team, you are creating a collaboration site and you are creating an Outlook group. So is there a way to match your department, let's just say marketing, with the Outlook group and the team at the same time? Or will it be a subset? And if it is a subset, well, are you actually going to use that collaboration site, or are you only going to use the team? And then how do you find all the teams that you're using? or have permission to, because they might not all show up in your app. So I apologize that I'm not fully answering that question in the 1 minute that I had, but I would look at the whole. In my opinion, they serve two different purposes. I'm still, maybe it's from my experience, an intranet is for corporate communication, pushing of information, gathering of information from other sites. And very soon, you'll have first-party pages from SharePoint into Teams. And by the way, Teams is using the SharePoint framework also. So that is going to be a huge benefit. All right, well, I apologize. I think I got to most of everyone, but we ran out of time. Thank you so much. If you have any other questions, you can send me an email, or that is my Twitter handle. We greatly appreciate it. I will be calling out to those people who volunteered to be called. Well, I guess in a little while. I saw the vast majority. Thank you for attending, and have a wonderful rest of the day.